Hello everyone, welcome to my tutorial. Today's tutorial I'm going to talk about the actual walkthrough towards the layered architecture implementation. So our application is fairly simple, that we are going to have a login page and the user will try to access with the user ID and password, and the security is just the basic authentication with the user ID and password coming from the database, and then matching that if the user exists in the database, and then it will show the list of the guests. Okay, and within the list of the guests, the user can add or delete some of the guests. Now we are going to do, or we are going to implement this in terms of the layered architecture. And in the layered architecture, we have divided the architecture or the layers into three layers. One is the UI layer or the presentation layer, the other one is the service layer, and the other one is the database layer. We can have as many layers as we want, but for this tutorial I'm going to show you just the three layers. Okay, so now if we look into the code, we will see that this is our objective. So whenever someone brings out the application, it will be like this. So at the root is the login controller. Login controller, and then this is going to login.jsp. So what does it mean? We already are familiar with the MVC architecture, and according to the MVC architecture or model view controller, we have a controller, and in this case the controller is this one. And whenever the controller is invoked from the server side, it renders to this JSP page. Okay, so both of these are part of our presentation layer. Okay, so the presentation layer consists of the controller and the JSP page. So if I'm going to do like this, presentation layer, and then we are going to have the surface layer, and then we are going to have the data or DAO layer. Okay, so now over here, the login.jsp page, when it is coming up, and we are going to do what? In the login.jsp, you will see an action, and the action is the guest list. And the guest list is actually invoking our guest list controller. Guest list. Okay, so that means whenever we are going to the login.jsp, you can see, let me bring up the application, and you can see over here login.jsp, and the login.jsp is, there is a form action which is talking about which is forwarding to the guest list controller, and the guest list controller is this one. Okay, and you can see the mapping over here. So we mapped that page or that action to this controller, and which is the guest list controller. So this is the presentation layer, and then we are going to invoke the presentation layer to the service layer. So if we look again at the guest list controller, and you can see that we are invoking this user access service. Okay, and within the user access service, we are getting the username and password, and whenever we are getting the username and password, we are passing that information through the JSP page, and we are getting it over here. and then we are passing that on to the guest service, okay, or user access service. Okay, so now the user access service is an interface. Okay, so let me write it over here, and then we are going to have over here the user access service. Now if we go and look into the user access service, that user access service is a method is the validate user. Okay, and you can see like this is an interface. Now this interface is being implemented by what? The user access service IMPL, and we go over here, and then you can see that there is this method. The method is implemented as validate user, right? So if we come over here again, this is the validate user in the interface, and in the implementation or in the class we are going to implement it. So again, in the implementation we are passing on the user, that means the user who has inputted its password and ID, and we are passing it on to another layer, which is the DAO layer, and in this case this is the user DAO layer. Okay, so now let's move on over here, and I can write one thing, user access service IMPL, and then this one is our user DAO. Okay, so we can write over here, this one is user DAO, and the implementation is obviously user DAO IMPL. Okay, so you can see that the controller is invoking the service layer through this. The controller is invoking the service layer through this interface, and again the service layer is invoking the database layer through this user DAO, and all the interfaces are being implemented by the class. This is the way that we are going to separate our layers. Now let's look into the user DAO layer. So user DAO, and in this user DAO interface we are invoking this method is validate user. Okay, so let's move on here, and you can see that is valid user, and then we are going to look at the implementation file, which is user DAO IMPL, and you can see that this is the class that is implementing this interface, and we are doing what? We are validating the user with user ID and password. Okay, so this is the user, and we are getting the name and password, and then we are running SQL, and we are executing our implementation over here. Okay, so the basic purpose again here is that you can see that how layered this application is. We have a presentation layer, which is the guest list controller, and the corresponding JSP page, and then that controller is invoking the service layer with an interface, and the implementation is being done with a class, and then the service layer is invoking the DAO layer, and again the DAO layer now goes to the database and returns whatever needed, and then that information is coming back to the JSP page. Okay, so that's all for today's tutorial. Thank you.